Okay, so we're back today. We got the 2008 Ford Escape. There was a previous video that I've already posted where we did the rear wheel bearing on it. And now we have a front wheel bearing that needs to be replaced. And while we're in there, we're also going to be replacing the brakes because the rotors are warped. So the first thing I'm going to do is take you for a ride and see if we can hear the noise, if the camera can hear the noise that I can hear from inside. I think it will. Okay, so one thing that we're going to notice first is just the need for the brakes while we were doing this. I'm putting it all in one video because it's all in the same spot. But the biggest thing is it drives smooth enough, but as soon as I hit the brakes, this car shakes all over the place. Pan down so you can see the steering wheel a little bit. And I'm barely even hitting them. So that's of course going to have to be addressed. And we're about to turn onto a road where it's actually smooth pavement. And then I'll actually get it up there where I believe you'll be able to hear the wheel bearing noise. Hit the brakes as light as I can here. Okay, go ahead, just somewhere up there. Are you filming still? Okay. Okay, you may be able to hear it currently. I can definitely hear it. It's a hum down in that corner. But the big test to do is if I turn towards it, well, today it's not doing it. Usually if you turn towards it, the noise goes away. And if you turn away from it, it might even get louder. And it does still do that. So I can't promise that the camera's hearing what I'm hearing, but as we're going straight, it's just kind of a hum. If I turn into it, it's more, it feels different. If I turn away from it, the weight shifts onto that bearing and it gets noisy. So now we're going to go home and get it all ripped apart. Alrighty, so I've done a couple of things off camera so far. Obviously I removed the tires, I jacked it up, I put it on jack stands. Now there's a couple things we got to do here. We will have to remove all of the braking assembly. So the caliper bracket, the brake rotor. We will also have to do something that lets us get the CV axle out of the wheel bearing. So we'll have to remove this nut, and then any combination of ball joint, tie rod, and these two bolts up here for the suspension will also have to come out somehow. You only have to remove as much as you need to get the CV axle out. So I sprayed this with oil. Not necessarily needs to be a penetrating oil, although it helps. It's more just so when you spin this, it's lubricated a little bit. I'm going to use an impact because I have one. But breaker bar would do the job too. That came off pretty nicely. Then I'm going to thread that back on there just a couple threads, and they just kind of like smack that with a hammer right there to dislodge it, because it's an old vehicle in Michigan, so I'm sure that's rusted in place. Don't hit without this nut on there though, or else you'll mess up the threads. Shouldn't take too much. Okay, that freed up a little bit. And I'm probably going to run that down to pull it back out and just work it back and forth to make sure it's real free. Not necessarily tight, but just on. Get some oil in there too. There we go. Now you can see that's freed up. That won't be a problem later. So now I can just take this nut and get it right out of the way. So the next thing I'm going to do is take off the caliper and the caliper bracket. Just a bolt at top and bottom for caliper and a bolt at top and bottom from the bracket. So I'm not going to film that. I'll come back when those are off. Okay, I turned the camera back on a little bit earlier than I said I was going to. There's a couple reasons for it. Things I forgot were a thing with this. One is that the bolts that hold these the calipers on, you know, the slide pins or whatever, they are a 9mm Allen wrench. That's not a typical size you're likely to have in your set. So if you're planning on taking this stuff apart, you might want to make sure you have one, or go buy one first.
That seems like a giant pain.
Kinda. The other thing is that it has these clips up here. I'm sure they serve a purpose. I don't know what it is. But it kind of holds itself together. Alrighty, our camera had a little bit of a weird thing where it quit recording while I was doing this. But it caught the part where you needed a 9mm for that. This clip goes on the outside of the calipers. And it kind of hooks the caliper and it hooks to the bracket right here. You have to pull one of these arms right here off of the caliper bracket, and then the clip will kind of fling off. So now that's off. Now I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of this off. The back of the caliper just has standard, mine's 18mm bolts. So I'll pull those off, which will then let me take this rotor off, and then we'll bring you back. Alrighty, I got that bracket off, and there should be nothing actually holding this rotor on right now. But we live in northern Michigan, and everything's kind of rusted on. If I was concerned with this rotor right now, there's other things I could do. I could kind of scrape around the center part here. I could give it little taps kind of in here, trying to avoid the studs. And I can kind of lightly wrap on it a little bit. But since I don't care about this rotor, because I'm doing brakes while I'm here too, I can just beat the hell out of it.
Ow.
Alright, so now we're left with what we're looking at here. Alright, so now we have to do whatever we can to get this CV axle out of here. It'll only compress a little bit. So I think I mentioned earlier, we could do it with the ball joint. We could do it with these two bolts that hold the strut on, but that will mess with your wheel alignment. Or we can also pull this tie rod end out of it. Or any combination of them. Honestly, I don't know until I get in here which of those I'm going to have to do. Alright, so I marked those so that they could go in the same position they had been in. And it turns out on this particular vehicle, those don't actually spin to do the alignment. The bolts are completely round, the holes are completely round, so that's not actually affecting it like I thought. It still wouldn't hurt to go take it to have an alignment after you rip all this stuff apart, but it's not as important as I had initially anticipated. Now you do have to be real careful here, because the suspension component here, the strut, obviously is made to support the weight of a vehicle, so obviously it's strong. But with that out, I also undid my ABS sensor cable, just so it's, I have lots of slack in it. Ideally, I would have liked to just take the sensor out, but it's seized in there pretty good. I'm afraid I'll damage it taking it out, and that would kind of defeat the purpose of taking it out to avoid damage. So I just pulled this all out of the bracket just so I can have a little bit of movement. And as you can see, I can kind of pivot it outward now. And that CV axle is already starting to come out. Just like I said, watch that strut. There we go. I did take the bolt out of the ball joint here, and I've put it back in while I was doing that. I feel like with it like this, I can now lift this up and off of the ball joint, and then I'll have all the room I'll ever need. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that bolt out and get the ball joint separated. Alright, I thought about it, and I'm actually going to do this a little bit differently. We could, just with taking the strut off of here and the ball joint, we could pivot it enough to get the CV axle out of here, and then I could put in my press, the on-car one. But I thought about it, and there's two main ways to press these things in and out, And in my video I did on the same vehicle on the rear wheel bearing, I used that on the car press. I have decided actually for this one here to use the off the car press, essentially over in the corner of my garage. So for that, I have to take the strut, the ball joint, and the tie rod off. I've taken the nut off of the tie rod already. And then if you just hit right where the tie rod goes through there with a little hammer, usually you can knock it loose pretty quickly. Like that. My ball joint's being just a little bit stubborn down there. I'm probably not going to film that, but it's just going to be a matter of, probably a little bit of oil and knock it around a little bit. You could use a pickle fork, but then you risk ripping the boot here. And then, of course, it lets the grease out and water and dirt in, and you don't want that. So, I'll probably just knock on this a little bit. Yeah, it's moving around a little bit. So, I'm going to keep on doing that. Then I'm going to have to completely unhook my ABS wiring, because since it's still in over here, I'm removing this entire assembly. So I'm going to have to unplug it and it'll come with me. So I'm going to play with that and then we'll come back. So the first thing we got to do is push the wheel hub out of it. If we had done it with the on-car press, we would have used the slide hammer to yank that out. We're doing it on here. I have a brake rotor that I've cut in the past to make an adapter to hold this all. Otherwise, just kind of rig it up however it makes sense. It is likely to be a little bit stubborn. Just go slowly. It will probably scare you several times. Now it looks like we're moving decently. These are just sockets, by the way. You find whatever fits the, there's my bearing. You find whatever fits this surface. Okay. It's like the inner race of the bearing stayed, so we're going to have to figure out a way to get that off of there. The way I'm thinking I'm going to do it is I'm just going to take a torch to this while it's sitting upside down like that. And once I heat that up enough, it'll probably just expand and fall off. Otherwise, I suppose you could use like a 3-jaw puller, a bearing splitter, but the torch is going to be the easiest way. Now, this one's real rusty, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on. But there's a gap right here in this piece. It's because this is actually a little like circlip. So we're going to have to somehow dislodge that. Probably replace it. I'm not sure, though. We'll see how that goes. But once that's out, then we can actually press the bearing itself out. Looks like the bearing is going to press, I believe, outward this way. Which would make sense because of where the clip is. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go put this in the vise and just kind of hit it that with a punch or a screwdriver and just see if I can dislodge it a little bit. So I'm just kind of taking a screwdriver, or anything pointy for that matter, scraping the rust out of here. Then just kind of hitting it in a few spots. I did see that there are actually the holes in these circlips here. This side hasn't shown up yet, but the one over there did. I can grab it a little bit though. And if you grab it, this is not the right tool, by the way. I'm just kind of, you can see that the clip does move that little bit. So I need to get this hole there and then get my correct tool out. Looks like we got a hole. This is the correct tool. Essentially it goes this way. These ones are reversible. So right now it would spread them. This one has to pull inward. So I flick this and click it a few times. Now it pulls inward. So my hands are right in your light, but I'll do my best. Okay.
Looks like the one side wants to move, but the other
The
doesn't.
one side does want to move. Yeah, exactly what she said. One side's moving, one side's not. You can kind of work it up and around. But to do that, you're not going to be able to see it. Because just in case this thing decides to fling, it needs a dampener on it.
It's like a little time bomb.
Yeah, it's very stuck in there. And it's definitely got a lot of rust. It would do a lot better if I could get this side to dislodge.
I think you just broke.
Yeah, I think the end of the clip just broke. So I was already saying I was probably going to need a new clip. There's almost no tension even left in it. So that dampener idea isn't really as important now.
What's important now is just getting it out.
Yeah, we're going to get it out, and it's almost definitely going to need a new one. Yeah, there's literally no tension on it right now. It's just jammed in that groove.
Gosh.
So we'll a little more rust scraping, and I'm just hoping that all of the rust is on the ring and not on this, because that's expensive and I don't want to replace it. So I'm going to try to get my screwdriver. Oh,
There it is.
okay, there it is.
Freedom.
So there's the ring. That's potentially, you could put that back in and it might hold it, but please don't. That ring is bad. It's never going to hold the proper tension. And even though this is a press fit, it still potentially could lead to a wheel bearing deciding to remove itself. Not worth it. So a little bit more rust, and then we'll get the other part pressed out. Alrighty, so we got the clip out of it. Now we have to put the actual OD and the rest of the bearing out of the, I guess you'd call it the steering knuckle. I have a lot of these adapters here from the On the Car press. If you don't have that, pretty much just find anything, whether it be a socket or a flat disc. And the biggest thing possible that will still fit over into the steering knuckle. Like, as you can see, I have this black piece here is an adapter from it, and it's the perfect size. It barely fits, which means it's pushing as much of this as possible right now. And then I just have to jack this up, and eventually it will give. I can see it moving. I'm not sure if the camera can.
It's moving. I don't know if we can. Camera might be able to see it if I get closer. It's gonna pop soon.
Okay. If we hit tight spots like that, sometimes you can just let it rest. It'll figure itself out. You could kind of tap on the outsides with a little hammer or something. Basically, we just keep on doing that, though. So we've been pressing this in a little bit. Alright, so you can see that the bearing is making its way out. And just keep going, and eventually it'll come completely out. Sometimes in a frightening manner. But there, we're out. Alrighty, so earlier you saw that this piece of the bearing stayed on the hub. I was going to try to mount it upright, so when I heated it, it just fell. I can't find a good spot to do that. So I'm just going to start heating it, and eventually the bearing race is going to expand, and I can take it right off of here. It might take a few minutes, but it will work, and it's the easiest way I know of to do it. Potentially I could cut it too, using the torch. But then I risk damaging the hub. Alright, so as you can see, I have that bearing race off of here. I ran out of gas the first time. I tried some other stuff. It was really seized on there. So I didn't get it on film because I was kind of working in a semi-quick manner. But what I ended up doing was putting this into the freezer overnight. Just shrinks up a little bit. I got more gas for the torches. I set it on this little block here that's smaller than the bearing race. And with this cold, I heated that up real quickly and was able to get it to come off. So I've got this here supported. It's a little wobbly now, but the bottom of this is flat. And I've just made sure that it's supported all the way around. This is what the new wheel bearing looks like on the press-in style. The inside is 2 pieces. As you can tell, when I took the other one apart, half of it stayed. So now we're going to push the entire bearing into the knuckle first. The important thing to do is you can see we have the inner part, and there's this little cover, and then the outer part. Since the outer part of it is what's actually going to be getting pressed right now, when we push down on this, we have to only push on this outer section. So it is completely flush across there. I'm just going to be using a flat plate that pushes on everything until it's flush with that, and then I'll find something better just for that spot. It's not press-in the entire way, so I was able to start it manually. It's up to you if you want to oil a little bit on the inside or grease it. The manual probably specifies one way or the other. I put a very light coat of trans fluid on it. It's almost more for just future rust prevention than anything here. I know my press will do just fine. Just make sure you press it straight. If it goes crooked, it'll get really difficult and you're going to have problems. And that's exactly what it's doing. Mine is trying to go crooked. So let's back it up a little bit. Readjust a little. It fixed it, but went crooked the other way. I kind of feel like if I had something flat up here, this would go better. And I will if I need to. Alright, so as you can see, I've gotten it to where it's flush just by having that. Now the next thing, we do have to still put it in just a little bit farther. Not sure exactly how much of that I can show. Yeah, you can see in there, there's probably, I don't know, give or take a 1/4 inch. It still has to feed into there. Alright, so it's flush. We have to find something the same diameter, remember, only as this outer ring of it. If we push the middle, we'll ruin the bearing. So, since I have these kits, I work on a lot of vehicles, so I have all these little adapters. Which is roughly the size. It's going to push on that outer ring. If you don't have it though, one good thing that's really convenient to use, because it needs to be pretty much the same size as this outer ring, is the old outer ring. You could potentially set this up here and then shove it in there. It'll push perfectly on it. And actually, because most of you aren't going to have that, I am just going to use that. I set a flat piece on top just so I can push all of it. Then there's just a whole lot of this to get it back down there. And try to end up somewhere in the center if possible. If it goes crooked, it won't work right. It will probably jolt at some point. Like that. Okay, it's being real stubborn. I might be at the depth. So we'll loosen this up and check. We probably are, it looks right. Okay. And yeah, you probably can't see too well. It is pretty tight up in there. I can see that it's right though. We're bottomed out up into the knuckle. And here you might be able to see this groove is available again. That's where that clip goes that we removed earlier. So let's go ahead and get that clip in. Okay, so if you remember earlier in the video, the clip that was in here was just, well, here it is. It was garbage. We even broke a little bit off. It's real pitted. We're not using it. So I got this one here from our local CarQuest. It's Dorman brand 933-205. And it's in much better shape. So you can use the tool for this that pinches in the holes. A lot of times I find it easier to just sort of work it around. Those are good clicks because it has to go into the groove. I think it actually is in there completely. I like to kind of just take a screwdriver or something, give a couple taps inward, even a couple taps downward. Just to make sure it's completely seated. We can see the clip is in over here, or at least I can. It's a little dark. But they're under the lip there. Everywhere I can see that appears to be in. So now all we have to do is get the wheel hub back into there. So on the same premise, before we were only on the out part of this bearing. Now we're going to be pushing this to the inner part. So we have to be able to support the inner part. So we'll get set back up over at the press and we'll meet you there. So once again, we're only getting the center part. I have these adapters. If not, just find something. If I put this in here, you can see that line where my fingernail is the edge of the inner part. So with this on here and centered, you can still see it. That's the only part currently supported. It sits down below this surface, which means when I set it up right here, it will only be supporting the center. Just like that. Then, need the wheel hub. Can go there. And I think I'm going to try using my little flat bar again. This one is going to try to go crooked. So there's probably going to be quite a bit of initial adjustments. You know, move it a little bit, move it over. Actually,
looks like it's going in pretty well.
This is going far away easier than expected. I could cut that, but then you'd think I was smarter than I am. Okay, we are bottomed a little bit there. I assume I will need a different adapter on the bottom because right now we're at the flush point again.
Man, that thing is upset today.
Well, I bought it at Harbor Freight and the price was right, and it does exactly what I asked it to.
That is true.
So, yeah, we were bottoming out against this. So, we're in there roughly a 1/4 inch. I'm just going to flip this adapter over just so it's not in the hole, and then just see if it wants to go down anymore. Probably shouldn't have gone up that high again.
You went very high, yeah. We're going to have to cut some of this.
I edit the videos. I don't have to do anything.
That's true.
The viewers want to see it.
They want to see the dress going down.
They need to know the very real part that is this.
All the quickies. Most exciting part of the video, right there.
Well, that might be down.
It looks like it might be down all the way.
Okay. We gave it quite a bit of force. Admittedly, I should have looked at it before I took it apart. It spins fine. It does seem right.
I would not know.
Okay. Sometimes they do sit recessed into there a little bit, and the axle will actually go up into there. Go take a look at that. The wheel hub part does sit a little bit recessed into it if you're looking at it from the back. I was able to shine a light up in here under the front, and I can tell that it is fully seated into there. So, bearings in, spins, does its thing. Now we have to reassemble. So we have to get it back on the ball joint down here, get the tie rod back in it, and rehook it to the strut assembly. First part I'm going to do is put the CV axle back in it, because that's going to be the stubborn part in a few minutes if I don't. So do that. Slide it down onto that ball joint a little bit. The tie rod can definitely wait. That's real easy to put in later. Fighting the strut, of course, can take a little bit of effort. You know, it is made to hold up a vehicle, so. And Northern Michigan, rusty, all that happy stuff. Okay. I just kind of stabbed the screwdriver through the one hole I could get, and that'll help to align it a little bit and help me get the other one in. Okay, one bolt's in. Second bolt's in, no problem whatsoever. Get the nuts on it. The ball joint stud isn't really cooperating on its way up. You can hit some of this and be okay. You don't want to hit the very bottom of that. If you cave that in, you'll be ruining the area where the ball actually has to sit. Okay, I believe that's in. If it is, I'll know because this bolt will go right in. Or at least very close to right in. Okay, so that part's in. So ball joint is on but not tight, strut's on but not tight. I can get the tie rod in. Get the nut started back onto that. Then we just got to tighten up those three things I just mentioned. Alright, tie rod's tight. I tightened the two bolts holding the strut. And I tightened this one that holds the ball joint stud in. The only thing that was a real problem for that was when the tie rod went back in, I tried to tighten it, the stud spins, because it's a ball joint. It's completely smooth inside to allow the motion that it needs. It's a nylon lock nut and it's a rusty stud, so it didn't really want to go on there. The stud itself does have a hex head at the very end of it, so you can hold the stud with a wrench and then turn the nut with another wrench. Mine was messed up right at the end though, where that spot was still hidden. And the way that I go about fixing that is with one of these. You can rent these at auto parts stores. They're actually a ball joint clamp, or ball joint press, I guess. Made for pressing them in and out of there. But what I do is the stud goes through here with the nut on it, and I get, of course, a socket there. Then I get something up here to kind of put pressure downward on that joint. Once again, you don't want to push just on the soft spot in the center. So you have to, I had a little metal disc that I had up there just to evenly distribute the weight. But when it pushes that stud down into the steering knuckle, the taper gets real tight and it holds it in place. And I was able to spin that nut far enough to actually get the threads, or to get the hex head at the end so I could tighten it properly. I think to buy these you can get them for like $100, unless you're real thorough on your brands. I bought this one here probably 15 years ago off of eBay, and it has worked splendidly. So you can be a brand loyal if you want to, and I'm not. So the knuckle itself is bolted in. Those 3 points are good. Still have to get the brakes back on. I have the CV nut on, but it's not tight. Well, I mean, it's tight as far as, you know, the ratchet goes. It feels tight, but it's not torqued properly. A lot of this, in fact, all of this has a torque spec, and I don't really worry too much about it. This one here I do, though, because the life of your bearing depends on it. So, I guess, though, what I'm going to do, I could potentially just put like a pry bar or something in here to hold it. And I might do that, I don't know. Or I could, you know, reassemble the brakes and everything. I can probably just pop the center cap out of the wheel and reach in there and make that the last thing we tighten. I think I'm going to check to see if I can do that. That's the socket it has to be. I'll point that over here real quick. This center cap pops out of the rim. You just have to kind of spike it from behind a little. Spike was maybe a generous term. The socket fits through there just fine, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to leave that cap off. When the wheel's on, we'll lower it down, and then the vehicle itself will hold it in place while I torque that nut down. Set that there, and we'll get the brakes together. So the rotor's on. All that did is slide right on. There's nothing holding it. Got to put the brake caliper bracket back on. So we'll slide it up in here. Start the one bolt. Sometimes it's easier if you put a couple of lug nuts on just to hold this in place. I probably should, but I'm being stubborn about it. Once these are both started, you can go ahead and tighten those up right away. It's like mine are 18s. I got that bracket tightened on there. Next thing I'm going to do, just kind of spray this. Sometimes there's like manufacturing oils. They put stuff on it so it doesn't rust before you get it. Also, I've just been handling it with my greasy hands. You don't really want that on there with the pads. So, next we got to get the caliper on. I have it zip tied up and out of the way. Let's get those zip ties out of there. Now, if you were only replacing the wheel bearing, you wouldn't have to worry about this. But since I'm putting new pads and stuff on it, I have to return this piston. I do have the proper tool. Granted, it's a cheapo version, but it's still the proper tool. I actually find that a lot of times the improper tool, which is a C-clamp, or I have this guy here that I like using. A lot of times I find that those work better. So it's on there. You just kind of tighten it slowly. Don't open the bleeder for this. You do not need to do that. I know some people do. Some people say that they have to or else it doesn't go back in. And if that's the case, you have something else wrong in your brake system. A lot of times it's the rubber hoses right here. They can collapse internally. They'd look perfect on the outside. Actually, this vehicle had that when we first got it. It had really bad brakes. Got it, took it down the road, and we'd put new calipers on it. And so we didn't have to worry about returning them. first time we took it down the road, we had smoky brakes. And that's what it turned out to be, is the brake hoses had collapsed internally. So the pressure from the braking system can push the fluid out, but it's not strong enough to bring it back in. Since these calipers are fairly new, and heck, there's probably only, I don't know, 5,000 or 8,000 miles since we put them on, they went in pretty easily. We have the pads. One of them has a spring in the back. That one should be self-explanatory. It goes into the piston and clips itself in place. The other one will go right here. Make sure the friction pad material is facing the rotor. Okay, so everything here does fit together in a certain way. You can feel it as you're putting it together. Gonna run our slide pins back in. Remember, those are that weird 9mm. Also, there should be a little bit of grease on those slide pins. I didn't say that. These ones had some on it, so since I didn't go through the process of putting grease on them, I guess I didn't say it, but doesn't take a lot, just a little bit. Make sure they don't seize in place mostly. And get them tightened up. And little plastic caps kind of cover them up. And we have this clip. I wasn't able to show me removing it because my camera decided to be weird. But it goes kind of... Let's see if I can get a little bit closer on that. They go like that. These tabs right here will go into those holes. There's one there, and then right here we'll get the end pieces. So that'll be right there. Those will be in there. Actually, that's probably about right still.
Yeah, pretty much.
The best way I have found to do that is to put them on the flat surfaces here first. And just kind of squeeze right here. And I'm sure you heard it. You can definitely see it. That clipped into place just like it's supposed to be. Okay. So, brakes are back together. All those are back together. I have to put the tire on, and once the tire's on, I have to torque this axle nut. So we're going to get the tire now. Alright, so we looked it up. First in the manual, and I have a Chilton's manual for this. And that thing was a very long road of, you know, do this. It's listed in section 9. In section 9 it tells you it's listed in 10, and then 10 tells you it's in 8. And I eventually found it. And I confirmed it with a couple internet sources too. I guess it's 221 foot-pounds. So we have the tire on, it's back on the ground, and we'll tighten. So there it is. That is torqued. Now I can snap the cap back in, and I have the torque wrench out, so I'll do the lug nuts too. And that's all good, and then we'll go test drive. Well, I'm going to do the other side brakes too, but I just did these ones. I'm not going to film the other side. Alright, so we're all put back together. Got both of the brakes on. We're on a test drive right now. We're just rounding the corner to the nearest spot to me that has good pavement. And we have to bed in those brake pads. So I think there's a certain miles per hour you're supposed to do. But usually it's just you get it up to about cruising speed. You give it a couple decently hard stops. Or at least a hard slowdown. You don't have to stop all the way. So hang on to something. We'll do that those, not that many, and then drive around a little bit just to let the brakes cool back off. So that's the brake part of it. Now we have to test for the wheel bearing. And this vehicle's kind of getting a little bit old, so it makes a lot of noises. But the bearing noise that we had was very obvious, so I'm sure we'll notice it immediately that it's not there. Or if it is, and I have to do it again. So usually didn't notice it till right up around 40 or 45. We're doing about 55. We're sounding pretty good. Normally, shifting the weight from side to side, if we shift it onto the passenger side, it would growl. So we're just going to do this and hope that there's no cops watching. Watching here. If you're watching at home, I promise I'm doing this for a reason. So yeah. Still other noises, but that wheel bearing noise is gone. Honestly, I think it needs tires, and I think it has since we got it, and I'm just too stubborn to put them on.
Yeah. I mean, it has tires that do what they need to do. They're just loud.
Steering wheel doesn't shake when I hit the brakes. That's pretty nice.
That's a good bonus.
Because it's been doing that for a while.
Probably since we got back in April.
Yeah, we ended up driving this from Michigan down to South Carolina, and then we kind of up in the mountains and stuff, and it wasn't happy about all that.
This car does not like hills.
The engine doesn't like it, and the brakes don't like it either. It's not a car for the mountains. It's I think it has the 3-liter in it. And I feel like it was designed for the Taurus, and it should have stayed there. It's getting dark. I'm not going to have time to do an outro when I get back to the house, so this is that. We are fixed on this. It's got new brakes, got the new wheel bearing.